Grant leaned close enough for me to smell the cologne he wore for other women. His voice was a whisper, sharp, rehearsed, cruel. "You'll never touch my money again." Every word hit like a verdict. Around us, the courtroom hummed with quiet power. His lawyers, his mother, his mistress, all waiting to watch me break. I didn't. I kept my eyes on the table, on the single white envelope resting beneath my hand. Inside it was the truth, the kind that doesn't just ruin reputations, it burns legacies. He thought I was still the obedient wife who asked before spending $1. He didn't know that the woman sitting in front of him had already rewritten the ending. My name is Jennifer White, and before this hearing is over, he'll learn that silence was never my weakness. It was my strategy. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and cold air. Light from the tall windows spilled across the floor, catching the reflection of his watch. An expensive one, the same kind he'd always used to remind me who held the power. Grant sat across from me, posture relaxed, a smirk almost forming as his lawyers shuffled their papers. He leaned forward, voice low enough for only me to hear. "You'll never touch my money again." It was spoken like a gentleman's courtesy, but it cut deep, slicing through every quiet humiliation I'd learned to swallow. Behind him, Lydia crossed her legs with slow precision, her pearls gleaming under the light. Claire, the assistant who had somehow replaced me in every room I once belonged to, watched with polite satisfaction. Together they looked like a jury I never asked for. I didn't flinch. My hands rested neatly on my lap, fingers interlaced, the same way they had been during years of pretending everything was fine. But this time, there was no trembling, no fear. The envelope in my purse was heavy, its weight steadier than my heartbeat, when Grant's attorney declared that I had never contributed a cent. The judge's gaze drifted toward me. For a brief second, our eyes met, calm, unbroken. And in that silence, I saw her pause, just long enough to know she sensed it too. Something was coming. For years, I believed my life was the kind most women envied. An elegant home by the Cumberland River, a husband who provided everything, and a sense of security that looked flawless from the outside. I once taught marketing at the University of Tennessee, loved my students, and believed in helping them find their voice. Grant used to call that passion charming, until the day he told me I didn't need it anymore. He said he wanted me to rest. He said I'd earned it. And for a while, I believed him. But rest slowly became confinement. My paycheck disappeared into our joint account. My credit card limits shrank, and every purchase came with a question. Do you really need that? Lydia, his mother, had a way of making her control sound like wisdom. She ran the White Hope Foundation and reminded me often that her son's success was the family's pride. You just need to protect his image, she'd say. That's how a good wife helps her husband. I didn't see the trap forming until it was already shut. I was no longer a woman with a voice, just a reflection of the man I married. It was on my birthday that the illusion finally cracked. Lydia handed me a Target gift card, smiling as if it were generosity. Minutes later, she turned to Claire, Grant's new assistant, and clasped a diamond bracelet around her wrist. The look Grant gave Claire wasn't professional. It was the quiet spark of something that had already begun. The mirror in the dining room caught us all. Lydia glowing with pride, Claire radiant with victory, and me, faded, small, almost invisible. That was the night I understood that perfection in our home was never love. It was control disguised as devotion, and I was done mistaking the two. It started with something simple, a stack of papers left carelessly on the table after he'd fallen asleep. The top page was a bank statement. One number jumped out. A transfer of $180,000 to Haven Sun Holdings in Panama. When I asked about it the next morning, he smiled without looking up from his coffee. It's an investment, he said. You wouldn't understand the paperwork, the same tone he'd used for years when he wanted to make me feel naive. But I understood enough. That afternoon, when he left for work, I photographed every page, the amounts, the signatures, the routing numbers. They told a story he didn't think I could read. When I compared them to the Foundation's tax records online, I found Lydia's name listed as the approving signature. That night, in his email drafts, another clue waited. A message from Claire. The Foundation's transfer is complete. We'll move the next set Monday. Just a few words. But they tore away the last layer of denial. I wanted to call someone, to scream, to tell the world. But instead, I stood before the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't crying. She was calculating. Everything I had built, every late night helping him polish presentations, every contact and idea I had given him, he had used it all to hide what he was. In the bottom drawer of my desk, I found an old notebook from one of my students. On the cover, a sentence I had written years ago during a lecture. Knowledge is the only thing they can't take from you. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, and for the first time in years, I believed it. When I closed the laptop, the house was silent. The glow from the city lights spilled across the river and into the window, cold and steady. The truth was no longer in his hands. It was in mine, and this time, I knew exactly what to do with it. Grant left before sunrise, saying he had an early meeting at the bank. The lie was easy to spot. He never went anywhere without his phone charger. The silence he left behind felt heavier than usual. I waited until his car disappeared down the driveway before walking into the one room he'd always called off-limits. He once told me this office was his world. I was about to find out what kind of world it really was. The blinds were half open, spilling a faint blue light across the room. Dust floated like snow in the still air. Every folder on his shelves was perfectly arranged. Too clean, too deliberate. More like the belongings of a man planning an escape than one running a business. I pulled open drawers one by one until the bottom one stuck halfway, refusing to move. When it finally slid open, I saw it. A crimson folder stamped White Development Subholdings LLC. The name was new, but the legal representative, printed in black ink, wasn't. It was Grant. Each page inside listed properties bought and sold in 3-month cycles, all in cash. My hands trembled as I photographed every sheet, the sound of the camera shutter echoing in the quiet. The sunlight cut through the paper like a blade, bright, clean, merciless. Justice, even in its infancy, had its own color. Then I saw another signature, Lydia White. Her name sat beside Grant's on the authorization forms. The air left my lungs. It wasn't just him. It was all of them. The same family that preached legacy and honor was laundering money behind a charity's name. Lydia's old words drifted back to me. The White family always protects what's ours. Now I knew what she meant. I drove across town to meet the only person I could still trust, Marlon Pierce, one of my former students, now a financial crimes investigator. When he finished reading the photos on my phone, he looked up, his voice low. You've stumbled onto a federal laundering network. If you go on, you'll have 2 choices. Work with the FBI or go down with them. When I left his office, the sky had darkened. Rain started to fall, steady and cold. In my hand was his business card, embossed with a seal that glinted under the streetlight. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. I stood there in the rain, knowing one decision could unmake or rebuild everything I'd ever been. The room at the FBI field office smelled of old coffee and fluorescent lights. Across from me sat Marlon and a woman I hadn't met before. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen. Her eyes were sharp, her tone clipped but not unkind as she opened her laptop. Mrs. White. We'll need verifiable evidence to open a federal file. If you cooperate, you'll receive immunity and protection. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that once drew marketing diagrams for students, now about to sign a document that could destroy the man I'd built a life around. My voice came steady, quiet. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it because my son deserves to know who his father really is. I signed the cooperating witness agreement. The pen scratched across the paper like a door closing. They handed me a sleek black pen that was heavier than it looked. Inside it was a recording device, my weapon disguised as civility. Marlon's warning came next. Tell no one, not your son, not your friends. If they find out, you won't have time to call us. When I got home that evening, Grant was already there, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. His eyes searched my face, his tone too calm. Where were you all day? I smiled faintly, slipped off my coat, and said I'd met an old friend from school, the one he once claimed was too modern to keep a husband. His mouth curled into that condescending grin I used to mistake for charm. He kissed my cheek. The scent of his cologne mixed with something metallic, sharp, almost like gunpowder. He whispered that everything he owned would always belong to him. I met his gaze, silent, and thought, and everything you can't see will soon belong to me. Later that night, I pressed the button on the pen for the first time. Grant was in his office, talking on the phone with Lydia. His voice carried through the door, clear enough to catch every word about the Panama statements and the next transfer. When the call ended, I stopped the recording and sent the file to Marlon. I held the pen a moment longer, realizing it wasn't just plastic and metal. It was proof that knowledge still had power. On the last page of the agreement I'd signed, a single line stood out. All cooperating witnesses act under federal protection. For the first time in years, I felt the faint, electric pulse of safety. Outside my window, Nashville glowed against the dark, the city lights cutting a clean line between shadow and truth. The game had finally begun. The house no longer felt like home. It was a stage wired for surveillance. 3 weeks after I signed with the FBI, I found Grant's watch on the dresser. Odd, since he never removed it. When I pressed a button, the red light blinked, recording. He was listening. I placed it back, pretending nothing had changed, and began acting the part he expected. An anxious, fragile wife losing her grip. Lydia dropped by with her perfume and her pretense of concern, reminding me to keep up the family's dignity. I smiled. The Whites always knew how to keep appearances. She didn't notice the irony. Every Thursday, an agent collected the USB hidden inside a vase. I lived in a blur of fear and control, each move calculated. When Marlon warned they might suspect me, I refused to stop. The game had just begun. That weekend, Grant hosted a dinner, pouring wine with false warmth. When Ethan left the table, Grant leaned close and hissed that he wanted to see how long I could keep pretending. Later that night, Ethan asked if I was investigating his father. I told him, gently, that when people fear the truth, they build lies to replace it. By week 8, the walls tightened. Grant cut staff, changed passwords. One morning, I opened an email from Claire. JW Panama transfer confirmation. She'd meant to send it to someone else, another JW, but the attachment revealed every hidden account. I sent it straight to the FBI. At Lydia's reconciliation party, Claire approached, trembling. You read my email, didn't you? I smiled. There are a lot of JWs. Claire, later, from the library. Lydia's voice carried through the walls. If she opens her mouth, I'll handle it. I hit record, sealing the case. That night, a message came from the FBI. Arrest set for the court date. I closed my laptop, watching the city lights cut through the dark. Grant once said I didn't understand the rules. Now, I'd rewritten them. The courtroom was packed that Monday morning, every seat filled with reporters and the polished faces of people who once toasted our marriage. Grant sat in the front row beside 2 lawyers who looked as expensive as his suit, that same confident grin carved into his face. Behind him, Lydia clutched her Hermes bag like a talisman, and Claire sat beside her, poised, still believing in the illusion she'd helped build. I walked in quietly, wearing a simple gray dress and no jewelry. Let them see weakness, I thought. Let them underestimate me one last time. Grant's attorney started first, his tone smooth and rehearsed. Mrs. White has no career, no assets, no contribution to her husband's success. She only wants his money. Each word landed like a deliberate wound, but I stayed still. Then my attorney, Mr. Howell, stood, slowly. He placed a sealed white envelope on the judge's desk. Your Honor, this is a supplemental document submitted by my client, verified by the U.S. Attorney's Office. The room froze. Grant frowned. Lydia leaned forward. Claire stopped breathing. Judge Eleanor Green opened the envelope, reading line by line. Her expression shifted. First confusion, then disbelief. Then she laughed, a sharp, ringing laugh that broke the air. Oh, this is good. This is very good indeed, Grant's voice cracked. What's happening? Your Honor? Judge Green looked up. Mr. White, according to federal reports, your wife has been cooperating with the FBI for 2 months. All your shell accounts, your foundation transfers, they're now part of a federal case. The doors opened. Agents entered with warrants. Claire stumbled to her feet, claiming ignorance, but the judge's voice was ice. Signing falsified documents makes you an accessory, Ms. Donovan. Lydia screamed that her son was innocent, but the judge cut her short. Her signature was in the Panama files, too. Grant lunged toward me, his composure gone. You don't know what you've done. They'll destroy you. I met his eyes, calm and certain. I know exactly what I've done. I'm taking back the life you stole. The flash of cameras lit the room as the agents cuffed him. Judge Green struck her gavel once, her smile faint but unmistakable. Justice, she said, has its own sense of humor. 3 weeks after the hearing, Nashville couldn't stop talking about the Whites. Headlines screamed across every paper and television screen. Real estate tycoon Grant White arrested in federal laundering case. White Family Foundation under investigation for fraud. The city that once admired them now treated their name like poison. I watched it unfold from the quiet of the house by the river. The silence felt foreign, almost heavy. For years, I'd lived surrounded by noise, arguments, orders, the hum of fear. Now there was only stillness. The phone rang. Marlon's voice came steady, professional, but softer than usual. They've seized all the illegal assets. Jennifer, the legitimate holdings will remain under your control. You'll keep what was yours before the laundering began. It was justice written in numbers and signatures. Cold, final, and fair. The ripple spread fast. Lydia was stripped of her position at the foundation she'd built her social identity around. Claire faced 10 years for aiding the fraud she swore she didn't understand. And Grant? He sat in federal custody, awaiting trial. His empire reduced to a case file. That afternoon, Ethan came to see me. His face carried the weight of someone forced to unlearn a lifetime of belief. I thought Dad was right, he said quietly. I thought you just wanted money, but now, I don't know what to think. It's all right, I told him. Your father was a storyteller, but truth doesn't need an audience. It stands on its own. He hesitated, then confessed that Grant had warned him once. If your mother ever turns against me, I'll destroy her. I smiled faintly. He was right about one thing. I had nothing left to lose. That's why I won. I turned off the TV. The last image faded into darkness, leaving only the soft reflection of the river on the window. The wedding photo was gone, replaced by one of Ethan and me, standing by the same water under a brighter sky. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the FBI. Your cooperation prevented a financial collapse in Tennessee's real estate sector for the first time in years. I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like the story's ending had finally been rewritten. The sun was sinking over the Cumberland, painting the river in soft gold. I stood on the porch in a white shirt and linen pants, the letter from the FBI still in my hand. They said justice was slow. Maybe it is, but when it finally arrives, it doesn't need to shout. I had opened a new account that morning under a new name, White Consulting. The money I kept, clean and rightfully mine, would fund something better, a center for women who'd been trapped the way I once was. teaching them how to control their own finances, their own freedom. Ethan would handle the outreach. His quiet presence beside me, proof that healing was possible. That evening, an anonymous email appeared. You may have won, but you've made enemies. I smiled, hit delete. Enemies remind me I'm alive. As the light shifted across the water, I felt no anger, no triumph, only peace. He once said I'd never touch his money again. He was right. I didn't. I built my own. The wind moved through my hair, and the camera of life pulled back, leaving only the glow of a woman standing at the river's edge, free at last.